Testing. Can you all hear me? Yes? So warm welcome to all of you this afternoon. It's really nice to see some actual bodies. Someone's waving to me, but I can't quite see who you are. But it's really nice to be embraced by actual people, right? And not forgetting the people who are tuning in from wherever you are online. A very warm welcome to this afternoon's panel. So this afternoon we'll be discussing the pandemic as Zeitgeist, opportunity and Muse, and just a little bit of housekeeping. This festival forum is co-curated by Arts Equator and the National Gallery Singapore as part of Light Tonight Festival 2021. So I don't know if you guys are aware, we do have a Q&A segment. You won't be able to come up to the mics, because there are none, to ask your questions, but we have prepared a Slido link where you can remotely enter your questions for the panelists today. The Slido link, I think it should be with online. The code is 55080 for the event, yes? And also to say that during this panel discussion, we will also have a live illustration of this discussion. So this person will be creating some mind maps of the content under discussion today. So if it probably gets really heated, you know, you'll see splashes of red happening around. Although I don't want to prejudice, you know, his palette at the moment. Okay, so enough of housekeeping. I want to get to introducing our 4 panelists today. And this is quite special because I think you usually get to hear from artists and the powers that be, the gatekeepers, but usually you don't get to hear the people who make things happen behind the scenes. So today, we're very fortunate to have with us people who are responsible from the creation to the production, from the curation to the programming here with us. So first, on my immediate left is Rupert Thompson. Rupert is head of artistic programs for Art House Limited, our neighbor. And prior to this, from 2015 to 2019, he was head of performance and dance activities at the South Bank Centre. And from 2011 to 2015, he was artistic director at Summer Hall, a multi-arts venue in Edinburgh, and described by The Guardian as one of the world's great art centres. And next to Rupert is Tulika, young, energetic curator who says she's focused on growing access to visual art and culture for the masses. And she's the founder of Magma Magnet, a multimedia art programming consultancy, creating work on accessible themes. So if you're interested in finding out more about the work that she's done, you can go to www.magmamagnet.org. And next to Tulika is another young, energetic curator. She is Kamiliah Maimon-Bahdar. Kamilah's curated many exhibitions and projects, including in more recent years, Nyani Suni, Songs of Solitude, and 2018 at Gilman Barracks, co-curator, right, with Shahida, at State of Motion, Sejarah Ku, and also Merakan Murni at Ketemu Projects in Bali. Before I forget, Kamiliah is also part of the collective at Softball Studs, a kind of collection of various creative individuals cited at Geylang, right? Yep. And she also works as a university librarian. And last but not least, Seok here, Yap Seok Hui, she represents the outfit ARTFACTORY. If you all have been to many fancy, sophisticated art installations in Singapore, particularly that of Ho Zun Yen, you would know that she is the person responsible for the setup for a lot of these, yeah? Seok is co-founder with Andy Lim of ARTFACTORY, which is a full-service production and technical company dedicated to installing art events for intimate spaces to large spaces. So I can, testify to the utmost professionalism that Seok brings to the work, because we've kind of worked together on an install for Zunyan before. So without further ado, I want to launch into the very first question, because there are 3 parts to today's program. So Zeitgeist, Opportunity, and Muse. So I would like to ask each of them to respond to the first point about the Zeitgeist, under the broad umbrella of the pandemic. So by taking stock, how has COVID changed or redefined what you guys did in the last year? And what was COVID's practical impact on your practice? So each one has a couple of minutes to talk us through what you've done in the last year. Yeah, over to you, Rupert.
Thanks very much. So, warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. I moved to Singapore a little over a year ago from the UK, and so my experience of working in the arts sector here has been incredibly dominated by the COVID experience, and I can't help but be mindful of the very different experience that's been experienced by the arts community or my friends in the sector back home. As I'm sure you all know, COVID is extremely prevalent in the UK, along with a lot of countries around the world, to a greater degree than here in Singapore, and I do often feel lucky that me and my family are here at this time rather than there, seeing the different experiences, the difference between the experience here and there, particularly in the context of art making. That awareness also informs my sense of what the defining characteristic of the pandemic is in terms of a zeitgeist, and the word that comes to mind above all is loss. That we have seen not so much in Singapore, but still here in Singapore and in other parts of the world in great numbers, loss of life, loss of loved ones, loss of projects, loss of opportunities, loss of connections and travel, on a collective scale that none of us have known before. It's in the air of all our experience. It's on all the online channels all at once. So that to me is, a very felt part of the zeitgeist. And as we know, art helps us to respond to our feelings, positive and negative or difficult, but in positive ways. Throughout history, art has helped us come together and find solace through loss. And I think that's a really important channel for artistic practice now. So while Muse sounds quite playful and almost whimsical in terms of its sort of support of creativity, actually I think there is something very powerful and generative in that shared sense of loss that we experience as a kind of motivator for making and coming together in the ways that we still can. That is something that doesn't come through all the work that we've been doing over the past year at Arts House Limited, but there are certain key projects that I would touch on in relating to that and in the context of this panel. So on the screen behind you can see the graphic for Vel Vel. This is an audio walking tour that we've put together, which will be available from later this coming week, which is inspired by, draws from, but also to some extent in replacement of the experience of the Thaipusam celebrations and procession on Thursday. This has been pulled together by a Tamil member of the programming team, Shrida, at Arts House Limited, but the drive to create it is that one of wanting to replace something that's not there in the form it would have been. The procession can't proceed as normal this year, which is felt or will be felt keenly as a missing element of life by particularly the Tamil community. And so this project has come about very organically as a reaction to that. And so we will be incorporating recorded sound from past taipusams, as well as scripted new material by writers responding to their experience of the festival. And the idea is to give audiences the chance, if they want, to recreate the walk. And of course, there is that, art and loss both very much connect to the body as well as just our head and heart. Or there's the chance for people to listen to that audio tour at home as well. And that is one of the areas that I know we'll be talking about in terms of the opportunities afforded by digital modes of communication. The COVID's forced us into that sense of, providing content in ways that people can access anywhere. Not everyone's going to be up for doing that walk down to Tank Road, but you can do it from your home anywhere in Singapore or indeed anywhere in the world. On that point of access as well, I've just got an image here from a series we did earlier in the year as part of our Lumination Festival, which takes an alternative look at Singaporean identity. In the middle of 2020, that whole festival had to take place online, but we did a series of documentary films about the Baweanese community here in Singapore, which would normally have been talks in the house. And pleased to say that we saw audiences that were much bigger than we would have got in the house. And actually, we were to some extent lucky that we were early in the pandemic, and so that sense of digital fatigue hadn't maybe set in as it has now. But I'm sure that there were people who were able to watch those films who would have found it difficult to make it in to a live event in the city centre. So there is a sense of outreach that's possible on the digital platform. I'll finish up just by circling back to an example of a project that we've made with that sense of art and solace. This is one that we've got on display right now as part of this festival in the porch of the Arts House. And as you say, it's just around the corner, so do take a look after the talk if you have a moment. But this is a public installation we've made in response to a book by the local author and filmmaker Wesley Leon Aruzu. You may know, but I'll say it here, that the Arts House is very much a national literary centre running out of the old Parliament. So most of the work we do is coming from or inspired by literature. And Mr. Aruzo wrote a really interesting documentary book looking at the experiences of a Mr. Takamatsu, who is a Japanese man who, after the death of his wife in the tsunami a few years ago, developed a kind of ritualistic habit of going diving to look for her on a daily basis. To some extent, truly looking for her, to some extent, sort of metaphorically and spiritually looking for her. And so we've created a series of installations inspired by that book, which we hope will chime with people's experience of sort of resilience and moving on through a difficult time, which is what this time for me represents most. But there is opportunity and power in that shared experience.
Thank you for your sharing, Rupert. And we'd like now to hear from Tulika.
So, hi everyone. Thanks Adele for the nice intro. So, like Rupert, for myself and the artists that are friends with me, there was definitely a sense of loss, but I think with that loss there was also isolation, which somehow led to collaboration amongst the community. We felt that there was a greater spirit of people wanting to work together in a way. So one of the projects that myself, a visual artist, Reza Hasni, and an interaction designer, Sia, we worked on together is called the Center for Altered Togetherness. And it was essentially a trip through multiple realms in the virtual space, where you were assigned an avatar as soon as you entered, and you could travel through portals and interact with other avatars from all over the world. So the digitization of this exhibition format made it easier to reach out to a worldwide audience. Also because the artist, Reza, he lives in Berlin, but he was stuck in Singapore because of the pandemic. So he could reach out to his friends and his community back in Berlin. And this exhibition is still online, by the way. And what you don't see on screen is the continuity, which you can go see in person, which is on right now for the Singapore Art Week at Gilman Barracks. We responded to us moving into phase 1, phase 2, and now phase 3. So the exhibition that we have on now is themed on nature, and it's all about how we always look at nature like therapy, but nature has always been a provider. So why do we, it's an AR exhibition, so it questions why we need digitization and why we need to augment reality to look at our current reality. So I feel like the pandemic kind of made us question the boundaries between the digital and the physical, and it led to us trying to make them more seamless and trying to figure out how we can coexist with our natural world and with our physical world, but also the digital world. And a second project that I'll quickly touch upon is audio, is an audio project. So it was actually presented with the Arts House for Singapore Writers Festival last year. We found that during the pandemic, there was so much to read and there was so much to see that it was a visual overload, and a lot of people were turning to audio to just get themselves to get away from things, but also feel like they were transported to a different space. So I had also launched my art programming consultancy last year, and one of the things that we produced, one of the original productions, was an internet radio station called Night Spin. And we did fun stuff to engage the community. So we did like a tarot card reading on air. It was live, recorded from the Arts House, where we got Becca DeBus to host the show. And the dichotomy of a drag queen hosting the show versus a tarot card reader who's telling your fortune. People were asking questions about their future, about the pandemic. So yeah, we were just finding different ways to reach out to our community, doing podcasts with creatives, just to find out how they spent their 2 months in lockdown. And you can also listen to all of these on the website. Yeah, that's all for me.
Thank you, Tulika. And Kamiliah?
Thank you, Adele, for the introduction. So I think I really do resonate with the sort of the themes that Rupert and Tulika brought up about loss and also solace, and what you said about artists not reaching out to each other, doing more collaborations. For me, I'm a member of Softwall Stats, but Softwall Stats is a project space with 11 others. We're all sort of involved in very different ways. It's a very amorphous project, and there isn't a very fixed structure to it. So the particular project I was very much involved with last year is called Pulau something. So I didn't prepare a slide because the entire program was basically an online peer-to-peer exchange of knowledge. And so I would have just been showing screenshots of our Zoom meetings and our discussions on Discord, which would have been really, we've seen enough of that last year and continuing on to this year as well. So initially, this was a project where participants from Indonesia, Malaysia, as well as Taiwan were supposed to come to Singapore for 3 days, and we're supposed to have 3 whole days of just each of us having little exercises and getting to know each other, to also discuss, sort of unpack the term Nusantara. We were supposed to also include a little day trip to Batam, but of course it was slated for March 2020, and that didn't happen, so we quickly adjusted and shifted to doing it online. But instead of doing 3 whole days, we decided to then stagger it over months, so to have this very sustained engagement. And for me, I would say the main thing, and sort of how the situation last year really impacted my practice, was this idea of creating, sort of recalibrating, and sort of creating finding new rhythms, basically. And this is also coming for me from an entire, for the past couple of years, really constantly, sort of jumping from projects to projects and exhibitions to exhibitions. So being able to then sort of create sort of a self-initiated program where we can sort of find different, sort of synchronize with each other according to each other's rhythms. So we would not plan things ahead. We would plan things from month to month. And for me, that was really important in sort of realizing how I want to work moving forward. Sort of having sort of very fluid structures so that we all can sort of engage in ways that we're capable of engaging at that moment. So that whole project was also really important for me, sort of to bring in my own subjectivity. Something that when speaking of rhythms, when we think about the calendar for our whole year, especially art calendar, we do have seasons, and we also have like cultural seasons. So last year we still had Ramadan, but we didn't quite have Hari Raya the way we used to. And I think very much the coming year, I'm not too sure how that season, how that rhythm will unfold over the next year, if we're going to go back to what we knew before or have to find different rhythms. But it was really important. So this very sustained engagement online was really important, because when I look back over the last year, there is this thing that I did, and there was this sort of connections that I made with people online as well. And so it was very much incredibly a grounding, and together with being in softball stats, it was a very grounding experience. And I would have to say that I think as art workers, a lot of us are quite used, I'm not too sure if it's just me, but sometimes we operate very independently, especially if you're a freelancer, right? You sort of operate like autonomously, independently. You get engaged in a project, but then you uncouple and move on to a different project. So for me, the past year of being part of Softball Stats and being part of Pulau Something was incredibly grounding, to have these sort of networks of friends that would check in on you, that would sort of be very accommodating. So we have a very fluid way of sort of organizing ourselves. And I guess that would be how I would like to continue my own practice for the coming year. Yeah.
Thank you for your sharing, Kamiliah. And finally, we have Siok.
Hi everyone. We're just happy to be here amongst this very busy period for all the art world. So a little bit about Art Factory, as Adele had earlier introduced. We're a technical production service company. We specialize on art installation and managing live events as well. So in some sense, crossing these two areas for independent artists, working with curators, institutions, to realize their art projects. So I will just talk through some of the projects that we took on in this COVID period. So in March, we were still in Melbourne doing Hozunian's Mysterious live performance in Melbourne, after which I was meant to fly to France for Isa Hoxton's performance tour in two cities in France. And the day I had to fly, I went to the airport to cancel the flight, because it was like 2-3 days after the WHO announced the global pandemic. So since March, it was kind of a slump, like going down this, because live events, so everything was kind of cancelled. We were like, okay, what do we do now? Okay, let's wait a bit, see what happens. And then we realized, okay, it's not quite going away. Then circuit breaker came. And so one of the first projects that we had to quickly adapt or upskill to was to do this Now Festival of Women. Now 2020, Now stands for Not Ordinary Work. It was a festival organized by T-Works, helmed by artistic director Nordlina Mohammed. And originally it was meant to be an in-person festival where we have performances, exhibitions, talks and stuff. And so quickly she decided that, okay, this is not going away. Let's change it to completely digital. So over 3 weekends or 3 weeks, we hosted a bunch of video conferences, a live performance that was streamed online, and also radio plays and stuff. So I guess for us, we had to upskill quickly to learn techniques of live streaming, social media engagement and interaction, and to find a good method of presentation of high quality images and not just Zoom meetings streamed online. Ideally, that would be, yeah. So we spent some months working that out and collaborating with Nolina to find the best way to move forward. So I think we ended up with a pretty okay presentation. And because at that time it's already, digital fatigue had set in. There was a lot of streaming of programs. So what would be interesting for people to still watch people in conversation and stuff. Technically, it was actually as complex as running a live event. Like in terms of sound, you have to make sure that the sound is good quality, even if the visuals are not so. And like, for example, the guests had to stream in on good enough systems. If not, you have problems. So a lot more technical rehearsals go into this. Live management during the show as well. It's as complex as running a live event. Then I move on to the next project, which is Manila Zoo by Filipino artist Isa Hoxon. This project was meant to be a work-in-progress presentation in the Taipei Arts Festival, where the Filipino team would travel to Taipei to perform. It was an interesting project for us as Isa and the curator Tang Fuquen had quickly decided that even though it was not possible to travel anymore, they would still proceed with a work-in-pandemic presentation, where the performers were fully virtual, and the audience would still gather in a theatrical space to watch something together. So if you see on the bottom right corner, you would see that we basically performed the show. We streamed the performers in digitally. The audience was in a theater like auditorium and watching this people. And what resulted was a form of a live cinema, actually. And we kept the theatrical elements of light and sound. So you still have the full sensorial experience. You can interact with the performers. They were lifetime speaking with the performers in audience. They did animal selfies. So I think it was quite a successful turn or manifestation of a digital and live project. Yeah, and then quickly we talk about the last one, which is more recent, Topography of Breath 2.0 by Pat To. So if the next slide, or no next slide. Okay. So, okay, it's a bit hard to see on this screen, but maybe in the live stream the audience can see the images better. Topography of Breath was a project by Singapore artist Pat To. She presented it first as an in-person performance last year in the State of Motion. So it's focused on different ways of breathing, on the breath. And so when you watch it in person, you can feel her breath, her sweat, her tiredness, her labor. So we were wondering how we could maintain such effect in a live stream performance. And actually, it was quite interesting to hear the audience feedback that, was this actually just a recording? Although we performed it live and rehearsed it live every time for the stream. So then we started to question, what are techniques of liveness, of showing and presenting liveness? For some people, they were quite affected by the breath, and because you hear it now in your ears, like much closer, so they were quite like affected in the sense of they started to get anxious when they heard her breathing. But some people was like, okay, it's too far away, we cannot feel it. So I think in these projects, we were trying to marry the live and the digital and seeing what is a good way to show liveness from a technological point of view, if it's possible at all. Yeah, so these are just some of the projects that we did since July until now, and we're lucky that this year the Art Week continued, so we have a few more opportunities to install visual arts exhibitions and also some live stream performances. Thank you.
Thanks so much for everyone's sharing of their various projects. I actually want to maybe change the tempo a little bit because there's a lot of stuff that we've kind of raised collectively, and I wanted to kind of reflect a little bit more on them, especially, with Siok's sharing there are a lot of like paradigm shifting moments, right? Thinking through a lot of questions that are thrown up because we are now presenting a kind of a hybrid model, going live and digital at the same time. So I want to use this opportunity to talk about Muse, or musing about things, and whether this pandemic has provided you some downtime to think about more creative or philosophical aspects of content production, or even your own creative existence, right? Your own raison d'être, for instance. So I was just kind of curious about, in your own individual spheres, what were you guys mulling about? And whom were you also mulling with, right? Because Kamiliah also spoke about needing to synchronize cycles with, your collaborators, your friends. There's a kind of readjusting, realigning all of our own priorities. Probably, the word care comes to mind, right? That you start to have to think about what the difficulties are from the other side. Yeah. So lots of things that are thrown up because suddenly your ground is unstable. Yeah. Anyone wants to have the first go? Rupert?
Okay, yeah, happy to respond to that. And yeah, I would say as well, just watching Siok's presentation, which was really interesting, I actually felt quite emotional seeing that audience watching that shared experience in Taiwan. Reminds you of just, what's changed, but what a brilliant response. And yeah, the idea of a working pandemic is actually a very nice way of terming something that is the best it can be in the circumstances, which is, really interesting. I guess my own experience of taking stock this year has been very heavily influenced by the fact that I've moved countries and continents into a new working environment. So to some extent, the business of working during a pandemic has complicated that, but I would say that was the dominating personal experience. But thinking about how the team of us at AHL have worked in response to this and thinking about our own processes, there is that challenge of responding to the circumstances in a way that's energetic and dynamic and sort of on the front foot, but that risks work processes that aren't really deeply embedded and felt. And in the circumstances, practically speaking, we've had to do a bit of both. I'd like to say we'd completely managed to step back and, do everything we'd wanted as well as possible. Of course not. We've had to do certain things reactively, but we have managed to find certain ways of working, which have felt really rewarding, given these challenging times. And of course, artists have used constraints to their advantage, throughout history. So, we can work in this way. The projects I can talk about are actually coming up, so I can only say so much about them, but we've got a really exciting digital project we're developing with local graphic novelist, but also digital technologist Troy Chin, which has had a really long lead time. And that's something that's meant a lot to us, just supporting him to go through phases of this project, which will be coming out soon, but may yet be revised further for, after it's in the public domain as well. And then there's, I can't really, the other example that's in my mind I probably shouldn't speak about because it's so far down the line, but I guess what it represents in the context of the question is a very specific set of parameters around a project that needs to be made to happen, and then thinking hard about how to apply that to the various circumstances in which you work and what's going to be the best fit for that. And where that feels real and valid, it's rewarding, and I guess an experience that can be learned from future years when those pressures wouldn't be the same, versus taking something and just putting it somewhere the first place it fits because there's a pandemic on, we have to do something.
I also wanted to ask, because you run an art space, like there's an actual physical building compared to the other panelists, whether your senses of space has changed. Have you thought more about how you inhabit this arts house, the bricks and mortar bit of it, and then where do you see yourselves lodged in the kind of disembodied digital world, and where your audiences are, you know, who your communities are and what you're building out there.
One really nice thing about being on this panel is it's forcing me to think about it because, again, seeing that footage from Siok, I realised that I think I have undergone changes in those attitudes and perceptions without really registering it as much as I might. The Arts House is also now closed for air conditioning renovation, but I guess some of the things that the safe distancing measures are encouraging us towards are things that I feel really inspired by anyway. You know, I do love a packed auditorium of excited people, but there's also something beautiful about small-scale audience exchange and promenade performances and installations that take you on a journey that may even feel individual at the time, but you know, you can have a stream of people coming through in fairly close succession. So these are things that are triggered by the pandemic, but work at other times, but yeah, relate to the architecture and that sense of a fixed space as well. What can we do with this environment that's going to work now, but also be a bit magical?
Thanks, Rupert. I want to hear more from our younger panelists. Yeah, and I think this is also a chance where I felt that our younger colleagues have actually had this moment to shine with their projects and really kind of showcase what they're about. I just wondered if you guys wanted to share.
Okay, I can go. So to answer your question of whether the pandemic was a muse, I don't think the answer for me is yes, because the pandemic, the word itself has such a looming presence that I cannot consider it to be a muse. But then you start, during the pandemic, when you're at home alone, you start to live a lot more on the internet. So I think I was surrounding myself with artists because of the project that I was working on. Reza and Sia, both of them have had very interesting relationships with the internet. For Reza, he's grown up with the internet and he says it's his canvas. And for Sia, he's a coding artist who likes to use the web as his medium to communicate. So we found ourselves living and breathing on the internet a lot more. And we were also starting to form these communities on the internet, like Discord, like what Kamiliah mentioned as well. But then very interesting things also start to happen on the internet. So, for example, the night that we launched our show, I remember it was the 7th of August, the Center for Altered Togetherness show. And we told the audience that the artists will be present in their avatar form in the virtual world, and you can come meet them from, like, say, 7 to 11 p.m. But around the time that the UK started to wake up, maybe like closer to 11 p.m. in Singapore, our server had a DDoS attack. A DDoS attack is a denial of service. It's a completely random attack where someone just sends like robots your way, and they create such heavy traffic on the server side of things that the normal user traffic cannot get in. So all the virtual worlds started to collide into one, and nobody could actually get into the virtual worlds. And then we had been using the internet as a canvas by doing Zoom calls. Like, the collaboration was completely virtual. But then we had to think about things like cybersecurity. So it was all a huge learning process. And I would say even now, the internet is still a muse because we have such a long way to go. Like, we're in a very early stage of internet usage, I think.
Do you also have ethical concerns as you were, dealing with? Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, people can construct and deconstruct if you put out art on the internet, for example. There's so many rules around that as well, but I feel like the artists have to be okay with it being open out there in the open. Like, there's copyright issues, there's censorship issues as well, and there's internet codes specific to different countries. Like Singapore, for example, has very specific laws. So yeah, for sure, there's still rules that you have to abide by.
Kamiliah?
I think just to add on about the internet, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Like, it could be very much a Muse, but then there's also barriers to it. One of it is very much accessibility. So I think we're planning to build a website for Pulau something, and we're just like, how do we, we want to make it as accessible as possible. So things like having a widget where they can sort of change the text on the screen, but then also adding alt text. But then also, if we were to have like an online event, then could someone be sort of provide, how does someone sort of also have access to these, to say someone who's has a sort of visual impairment, sort of engage in this on the internet. But to add to, I would say to your original question about the pandemic as a Muse and the sort of thoughts that we have on sort of our own like creative practices, I really do think that it has, how do I say this?
Well, actually, it doesn't have to be musing on the pandemic, but rather that because of COVID, and because we, had to kind of, in a way, shut down. And have that bit of time. Has that bit of time allowed you to rethink some of your old processes, old modes of doing things? Yeah.
So I think it has. I have had to really rethink, sort of, as I mentioned earlier, sort of the rhythms and how do I sort of create my own counter rhythm. But one of the things that the situation in the past year has thrown up is also how much isolated I feel, and how that has impacted me and my own practice, because I felt like what was missing is this kind of sociality that comes with events. Sort of the thing when we go to an opening or an event, and then we have a chat at the corridor, or go for dinner after. Like, all of these small things of just sort of coming together, meeting friends of friends, or catching up. That kind of sociality very much fed my own practice and my own sort of work as an art worker, and that has completely disappeared. So I do find myself sort of grappling, grappling and being quite isolated creatively, even though you could sort of have. You can find other ways, such as Zoom calls, or try to like share things in sort of through digitally, but it's just not quite the same as being in someone's presence and sort of really having almost pretty much undivided attention, like this face to face, being able to read their body language, being able to know when to interrupt instead of having this constant weird lag where you want to say something and then they stop, but then so you say something but then they start because there's so it's that I really do miss that kind of sociality. I think that it is very much important. It can be considered a very productive time to sort of the life of an art practitioner.
Thank you, Kamiliah. Siok? Because you also raised a number of very interesting questions earlier.
Yeah, I mean, apart from those, I think one thing I just thought about is like, if we had this pandemic 10, 20 years ago, without all the technology we have today, I mean the level of advancement of technology, what would art, or how would we actually exist right now if this happened 20 years ago? Like in SARS, 2003, that's just 17 years ago. Maybe I was a little too young to remember how it affected our lives. But it's a bit strange. I cannot fathom how we would interact with people across, even locally across the world. So that's something I just thought about. I don't know why. But I also want to say that, of course, technology has long been existing in art, all these live digital interactions where there is participatory art online where, I mean, like some of the Japanese artists have made works where they put, you can trigger things online and it transmits to them locally. So all these have already existed. It's just that now, with the advancement in technology, we actually have quite a upper hand. You know, we like software is already written, so all these advancements actually make art making easier for everyone. I was also thinking about how now, with the pandemic, it's more difficult to travel, if at all, and how therefore we continue to do the things we used to do. For example, installing for artists in biennales and such. How do we, for example, like when we worked with Adele 3 years ago in the last edition of the Bangkok Biennale, she was on site, we were not, so at least there was still someone to take care of things. But in this situation, then we would have to completely rely on the local team to execute the artist requirement. And this year we did it for Rayan and Kafai for Kim Ong. And, you know, it was quite a lot of chasing and following up and stuff like this. So you, in some sense, you have to trust the local organizer. And for, in terms of, for the artists, this becomes a relegation of power in your, on how you want your work to be installed. You can, of course, give all the requirements you want, but whether you get it at the end and you cannot be personally on site to see through, I think that's also something we think about or question. And like, do we now make like step-by-step manuals on how to balance the sound or adjust the video image? How do we translate requirements when you're not there physically? Yeah, things like this. So in terms of redefining our practice, or thinking about how we do this for the future, I think it's still work in progress for us. Yeah.
I mean, I find the question that you raised, you know, what would we do if we didn't have all this technology at our disposal? Because I also want to get to another aspect, which is, you know, stuff that you've also raised, Kamiliah, about sociality. If we didn't have that level of technological intervention, has this moment actually provoked us enough to rethink how we are relating to one another, right? Are we speaking differently? Not just in terms of the lingo, but are we appreciating the presence of each other differently? And on a micro level, how are we going about, you know, acknowledging those allegiances or affinities? Yeah. And also, you know, Tulika's been shy about, you know, talking more about her radio program, but since Rupert also talked about the sonic walk, sound is actually one of the most, I think, seductive things that we have right now, which is actually even old school, right? Because we had the radio from way back already. And that's sound being able to, you know, convey this atmosphere of intimacy. You can take it wherever you go, even to bed, right? And very often, you know, we don't perhaps give enough credit to sound. Like we credit the technology, the speakers and the equipment and whatever. But the actual production of, you know, say the spoken word or how music comes together. Yeah, I wonder if any of you wanted to speak more about this. Tulika? You look like you got lots to say.
For sure, sound has the ability to transport you to a different space. But specifically, audio really became a tool to connect with people across borders, to really defy geography during the pandemic. Which aspect of the radio show would you like me to talk about?
Well, anyone that you feel like responding to right now.
Okay, so
or even text, you know, the written word, that we've not kind of paid much attention to, I guess. Yeah.
So one of the things that was interesting was recording podcasts over Zoom calls with creatives that we would otherwise see at gallery show openings or in the sociality of spaces when gatherings were allowed. Just asking them how they're spending their time, and questions about productivity were coming up a lot. Like we were all redefining how we viewed being productive. Productivity didn't mean that you had to always be doing something or putting out new work. It could be very solitary as well. You could just be taking time to watch movies or just read books or catch up on literature, listen to podcasts. And these were some of the topics that we covered when we were talking to creatives as part of the SWF radio show. Mm-hmm.
Rupert, want to say anything about your sonic walk?
In terms of the sonic walk, nothing comes to mind apart from what's been said, but it was an absolute pleasure working with Tulika on the radio station, and it felt like a really fitting response to the circumstance we're in. And yeah, I mean, just anecdotally, lots of friends saying how music is what's getting them through at the moment. You know, that way that sound can just reach you immediately. And I guess one of the tensions we've seen in the pandemic, particularly here in Singapore with that crazy newspaper poll there was a few months ago, we've seen on the one hand artists really struggling in terms of available work and a sense of a role in these pressurized times. And we've also seen the public turning en masse to art for support and entertainment in a difficult time. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming months. And in terms of sound, like in recent days, I'm mindful as well of that fantastic performance by Amanda Gorman at the Enorma Curation just a few days ago. A young voice, enormously talented, but also just that sense of a different rhythm. What can be imagined? How can just that sense, the connection between sound and her poetry carried it so well, and meaning and what we collectively experienced. And that felt like the change of gear that inauguration represented in so many ways. And I think people responded to that.
Do you find yourselves being more performative these days with your own voices? I mean, no. That's interesting, because I find myself, because, of how important I perceive sound, I'm also making sure that, I'm working my own voice and articulating myself much more than perhaps I would used to. Yeah, because it's such a useful vehicle now that we cannot be physically present en masse, right? So my voice is the only thing that can travel, even on screen, on Zoom. So that's where I think there's this amplitude to kind of perform, and that level of artifice can help convey, other modes of thinking, other new experiments, perhaps. Yeah. So I'm just on that level thinking about whether we, as producers of content, have also inhabited other roles as well. Yeah. Have you guys thought of yourselves as sometime artists, performers? No.
I started thinking of myself more as a user experience designer or writer through the pandemic, because in order to engage people when you're creating experiences, you had to define their journey for them. And that was a role that I think I did not take on before the pandemic. And when you talk about sound, for sure, I felt the same thing, like with sound being more performative, because you only have like your voice that can travel, and it sort of becomes your body language. Like I'm moving my hands right now, but in another time and space, you would not be seeing that, and I would have to convey that through my voice, maybe. Yeah.
Just now, I usually just turn off my video cam and just let my voice do the walking, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm a little bit conscious of time because we're running out of it. And I do want to kind of take a stab at the final point on opportunity. So I wanted all of you to respond to, or think about how, where you think we could do better, right? And whom have we left out in terms of what we've now been kind of doing? Are there some of, other kinds of strategies, that could take us forward? And this could include ways in which you think we could, map a possible future post-COVID as well. Ooh.
Sorry, I just sort of wanted to jump on. I guess it's also relating to your last point, but jump on the earlier point about how do we now relate to each other, and how Tulika was also mentioning in this conversation, rethinking productivity. So one of the things that I really enjoyed the past few months is, instead of asking what are you doing, it's how are you. So it's it's very much there's this more care and concern for each other, rather than sort of like, so what's this project that you're working on, and I do hope that will be something that will stay with us.
Anybody wants to have a prognosis of what's to come? 2022, 23, or 25 even?
I don't know, but for me personally, I would like to be able to create more of a leveling ground in the way that I deliver experiences. This could be in terms of accessibility, or it could be in terms of concept and reach, anything. But just to lower the hierarchies, or just try and eliminate them as much as possible, because I feel like art has the power to do that. Ooh.
Are we being
Sound.
chased? Is that the Oscar ceremony kind of chaser? Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, no, just moving towards leveling out that hierarchy. I think personally for me, that's what I would like to work towards.
Chuck?
Yeah, I think, we're in the entertainment industry after all, art and entertainment. So we definitely still want to focus on the live events, bringing it back, but of course, it being COVID friendly. What are ways of presentations and manifestations of art? So how can this form exist, and moving forward, what developments it can have? So I think now is like, making new contacts to collaborate, find ways, like even more so than before, because we, in some sense, our work also relies on artists, what artists want to do, how we can support, how we can work together to find different ways to move forward in this COVID times and beyond COVID times, when that day comes. Of course, then, I think responding to another topic in the previous panel about travel, and accessibility, like in terms of, we talk about AR and VR, how accessible is VR? It's a great form of entertainment and virtual presentation, but how accessible is this for the general public? One VR set costs money, so then can we still do proper outreach using technology, and how, I think these are things we can all think about together.
Yeah, but you've also raised the question of funding as well, right?
I was going
and also sources of funding. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and of course with all funding, whether it's private or public funding, this, I think we fall back on the deliverables. So I think then it comes down to the producers and the artists to get these fundings and produce things that tick the boxes.
Have you guys tried crowdsourcing for some of your expensive productions?
The artists have done so, like sometimes, but often this was for like travel. Because there's no funding for travel for the artist and the technician to go, so often it's been for travel projects by the artist, initiated by the artist. So that to varying degrees of success, I would say.
Rupert, from the point of view of Arts House?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. One is sort of related to what we've been touching on in terms of taking stock, is the sense of building blocks. So some of our other venues are Aliwal Arts Centre and Goodman Arts Centre, and similarly, they've struggled in terms of what to do when in place of their normally live programs. Aliwal has a really nice program of videos coming out at the moment called Aliwal Tracks, and one of the things that those have practically become are actually showcase materials for the artists involved, as well as content in themselves. So it's actually just something that's of value for the future that can be created now because there was space to do so. So that's something to consider. In terms of my own aspiration, I mean, I am through and through an internationalist, and that sort of never goes away, and it's been really inspiring to hear the other panelists talk about the exchanges they've been able to maintain and even foster digitally online, and I hope that continues to grow. You know, I know we're all feeling the loss of travel and what it means to, you know, meet people face to face in other places, but you know, these internet connections are close to free and, you know, do offer a lot of opportunity. So I hope that, you know, we do see artists doing more amazing things in that space, and yeah, more connections now we've got the hang of these platforms a bit more.
Well, it has been mooted that internet connection is actually a human right. Yeah, more so now than ever. And I just want to quickly now go to the Q&A, because we're past 4:30. I just also want to encourage everyone to put their questions down if you have any in Slido. But I have one here for all of you. What do you think will be the impact of the pandemic in the way we configure ourselves as artists? Well, I would say artists / content producers, people in the cultural industry, in the post-pandemic society. Not too far off what we've just discussed as well. Yeah. It's a bit of a mouthful. What do you think will be the impact of the pandemic in the way we configure ourselves as artists in a post-pandemic society? Yeah. So I guess, is there a kind of reconfiguration, rescripting of, you know, business as usual, right? The functioning of artists as artists. Maybe, yeah, do we still want the category of being called artists or curators, programmers? Yeah, in a post-pandemic society.
I'm interested by the phrase "reconfigure ourselves." That's really distinctive language. Like, and it does feel fitting for what we have to do. You know, we have to consider a great deal more legislation about what we can do than before, as well as circumstances around it that are informed by the circumstances. And configuring, you know, has quite a formal process, like sound to it that feels like something we have to do a bit more.
Rewiring our circuits.
I don't know if I'd have thought of myself in past years as having to configure myself. There was just so much you took for granted, but now, yeah, you kind of do. So I don't know if that in itself is almost the answer to the question in my mind, that you do have to sort of, there's a configuring exercise that is almost part and parcel of starting something now that feels new.
I think for me, it's speaking about being a content creator. Yeah, I've always, because I used to work in sort of the medium of exhibitions, and for me, what I really enjoyed was being in the space with the audience and being able to speak with them. So, the past year, I would say I haven't been generating content. I have been working along with other artists. But yeah, I was just wondering, Tulika, so how do you, for me at least, the role of a curator is to bridge the work with the audience. And how do you actually get feedback from the audience, or how do you hear from them?
I think when the gallery sitters don't have to explain the work too much, then it means it's worked. Like you have managed to bridge the gap. But I mean, I feel like reconfiguring and rewiring, in the few years that I've been a curator, maybe 3-4 years, my role has always changed, and I'm still trying to figure out what it means to be a curator. I'm a writer, I'm a project manager. I make sure the artists need to give their work on time, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this, like, as well. And now, like, UX designer, grant writer. So I don't know. I feel like the word curator is so, the role of a curator is so broad that you have to define it for yourselves, and maybe the pandemic will help some people define it, or maybe not. Yeah, I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess for me, I'm kind of grappling with how when you're trying to translate your content digitally, how do I actually engage? I want that direct engagement with people on face to face. So that's why I guess I'm finding it hard to reconfigure.
Oh, you don't want to reconfigure?
I mean, we're not the artists, so, but we of course work with the artists, so we have to think like artists, in some sense, to guess or extrapolate what artists want to create in their work.
But did you ever wish, your artists were a certain way, maybe less stick in the mud, or I don't know?
Well, I think the artists that we eventually work with, we find a common rapport. We understand what they require, what are their limitations, what we kind of know what they go for, what they are sticky about, for the sake of the artwork. Yeah, so I think a lot of the configuring will actually be about sustainability, I think, travel. Like I said, because I was like traveling a lot of the time, maybe 2/3 of the year I'm away on tours with artists. So in the post-pandemic world, I don't know if post-pandemic means still traveling or no more traveling, because post-pandemic, although post does not mean safe. I mean, I don't know what post-pandemic will be. Yeah, but, sustainability from the artist's point of view, if they choose not to travel, does that mean then I have to travel in order for their works to be executed properly? So then does that become my moral dilemma? Because at first it was the artist's moral dilemma to, okay, let's not travel so much. But now if I send someone instead, then does that become our team's moral dilemma for environmental questions and stuff? So
on that note of dilemmas, I have to call this panel to its end. But thank you all so much for sharing with us your thoughts and your experiences, and perhaps also forward-thinking a prognosis of what the future might bring. And I want to thank you, physical audiences here, who've spent your hour with us. I just wonder, are there any further questions or that you might have for our panelists? Please, you can write to I think the organizers, and they will convey them to our panelists as well. So I guess, do you guys still do applause? Maybe that would be nice, a kind of a sonic way to send your appreciation to the panelists. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and please do support the rest of the programs for Light Tonight at the National Gallery. Thank you.